How can I follow anything like that? I'm so grateful to be associated with Dino and to be able to be part of this panel. This is a panel in which we want to talk a little bit about, so what can I do? How does this work in my life, and how can I participate? And what a marvelous example we've been able to hear. I want you to know, Dino, that when I remember well the day of the oral argument before the Supreme Court, and you were there. And I was in a meeting with several members of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. We were in New York City, several of the general authorities of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a few other individuals as we were thinking about next steps in what we sensed was a very, very truly an erosion, a threat of erosion of religious liberty in this country that is one of the underpinnings of our nation. We all knew what was happening that day, and we were attentive to text messages as the day progressed, but we were involved in this meeting. I want you to know that we, among many others, were praying that day for that outcome, and what a marvelous outcome that was. One of the truly significant cases in the jurisprudence of the Supreme Court regarding religious freedom. So thank you for your sacrifices of faith. I might just begin by referring to one quick story. I was an undergraduate student here at BYU. I lived in the dormitories. There was construction going on campus. When you're a freshman young man, you got a lot of, you're missing some filters, let me just put it that way. And I remember one night being awakened late in the night. I can't remember if it was late at night or early in the morning, but one of those, and it probably doesn't matter, by a young man who lived on our floor who said, "Hey, you guys, guess what? You know that construction crane on campus? This is the kind that they build in place because it's so large. You know that construction crane on campus? I just climbed up the outside of it and shimmied out to the end to hang a sign for my girlfriend." He thought we were going to be thrilled. You know, what a cool thing he had done. We all, even though we were only 18, we all reacted with, "You could have died." To which his reaction was, "No, I couldn't. It says in my patriarchal blessing I'm going to serve a mission." Talk about misplaced confidence, misplaced faith. I thought immediately to myself, yeah, maybe in the spirit world. The fulfilling of prophecy is something that we in our church believe in. We believe that God's word will not pass away without being fulfilled, that all that he has declared will be fulfilled. But we also believe very firmly that it will not be fulfilled without faith, without the exercise of faith. And I think we've seen today an example of someone who put his faith so that God could then do his work. Now, in academic circles as well as in legal circles, it's probably not fashionable to talk in terms of faith so openly, but I think we can do that here. And we're grateful to be at a private institution where we can make those expressions without repercussions. So what can I do? I thought I'd just review very quickly that religious freedom is a foundational principle of our nation. You'll recall that in the early settlement of this nation, many, many different peoples came holding different faith viewpoints. In more than one case, colonies were actually settled as places of refuge for particular minority faith groups in Europe that were leaving oppression, affliction, and persecution in order to come here. It wasn't a perfect history of religious liberty once they got here, because they fell victim to a very common thing, that when you're in the majority, then you oppress the minority. And those who had been persecuted in the early days of colonies became oppressors themselves against minority viewpoints. But over time, things started to sort out. Among many factors, was the fact that people could pick up and move if they were in difficulty. They could find new places to live. They were far removed from central governance of the various churches because they were on the American frontier. And I think one of the truly important things was that there was such a variety of religious belief in America that people had eventually to learn how to get along with each other because they had to live with each other in community. So America became a place where even today, as part of our foundational myth, if you wanted to call it a myth, I don't mean myth in the fictional sense, the fictitious sense, but the national myth includes a strong allegiance to religious freedom as being a foundational principle of our nation. We know that in practice it was not always observed. One of the evidences of that is what happened to Catholics and to Baptists and to Methodists early on. And in the mid-19th century, what happened to members of our faith, the LDS Church. And thus, our own heritage and the heritage of Utah is linked to religious liberty. It is a foundational principle of this state of Utah and a foundational principle for the LDS Church. You see the exodus here, if you can see it, from Nauvoo as the members of the church were driven from Nauvoo, Illinois, and settled in the desert, actually having to leave the jurisdiction of the United States, looking to preserve their religious freedom. At that time, religious freedom at the federal level was not well developed, which was part of the problem. So as Latter-day Saints, our commitment to religious freedom is rooted in basic doctrine. Those basic doctrines include that moral agency, the ability to choose, indeed the essential responsibility to choose between good and evil, is a central feature of God's plan. One of the reasons He created this earth for us, and one of the reasons we are alive today, to be able to exercise faith by choosing between good and evil. Moral agency is central to God's plan for His children. And a principle that Matt Richards explained quite well, that faith cannot be forced. It's the same with opinion, really. If opinion is forced, it's no longer your opinion. Conscience is that fundamental principle at the root of all liberty. And one of the reasons why we call religious freedom our first freedom, a foundational freedom on which that undergirds other freedoms. Of course, it's also declared in our articles of faith. We claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience, and allow all men the same privilege. Let them worship how, where, or what they may. Faith cannot be coerced, and faith is a precious commodity. So what can I do? How can I exercise my faith? What should I do as a Latter-day Saint, as a citizen of this country, as a citizen of other countries, as a professional in the legal field or in some other field? What can I do? We've heard a lot of good suggestions, and I hope that you'll know that what I've got to show you is not an exhaustive list. It is based mainly on some of the thoughts that some of the apostles have expressed, but also on things that have been stated during this conference. Number one, become informed. We've already heard that multiple times. Becoming informed on a topic that is abstract, like religious freedom, is not easy. You could probably poll a number of people on the streets and find that the vast majority feel loyalty to religious freedom, but if you ask them to explain what that meant, you'd get a lot of blank stares, or a lot of people asking for more time to think about it. It's often not something people can understand. Becoming informed is more than just understanding what religious freedom is. It's understanding what the true issues are. Among very sophisticated and educated people, we've heard repeatedly that this idea that religious freedom is under attack is a myth, that is simply a fictitious argument that's being used to cloak more sinister feelings of bigotry and hate. A disguise really for feelings of bigotry. So we need to become informed and understand. I'm grateful that you're here. I think this is a good step toward becoming informed, but we're not finished. Here's a quote from Elder D. Todd Christofferson, one of the 12 apostles. We need lawyers and non-lawyers who care enough about religious freedom and are well enough informed that they can recognize both existing threats and those that are likely to materialize in the future. Number 2, join with others who share our commitment to religious freedom. We've heard that here. Be part of a chorus, not a soloist. I don't know about you, but I'm not a very good soloist anyway. Some of you might be good soloists, but religious freedom is for all, and we've got to be part of a chorus to make a difference. Building interfaith trust, working together in interfaith cooperation on religious freedom takes interaction. That means time, spending time, maybe social time with those of other faiths. It takes true listening and a genuine desire to understand. We need to broaden the coalition. Religious groups are targeted from both the left and the right. We heard that from Professor Quinn Monson, who showed data on how religious groups are targeted from both the left and the right. Religious freedom is for all. I might add, we've got to be careful about partisan divides when it comes to religious freedom. Because did you remember how Professor Monson showed that if we're talking about a question that is partisan, people were much more willing to become strident in their own prejudices when it represented the view of their party or an opposing view that they repudiated because they didn't like the other party. They're much less reasonable. So we need to broaden the coalition, broaden the spectrum of people involved, and be part of a chorus and help generate a chorus. We read in the New Testament about leaven. Leaven meaning the yeast that goes to produce the loaf and expand it. And we talk about leaven how it can make a difference. You and I need to be leaven in the loaf to expand the chorus and to build interfaith cooperation. As President Hinckley used to say, stand for something and others will stand with you. 3, engage in your profession and in the community. We need to build credibility and expertise. It's a great start to be a good friend, but it's better if you are credible and they rely on you and look to you for help. So particularly you professionals, build credibility and expertise in your profession. Become the very best you can and generate that reputation that will be such that people will listen to you and look to you with respect. Network. You know that word. We've heard before during this conference that if they know you and respect you, you will be more effective. People listen to their friends. They listen to people they respect. Participate in government. That's both the privilege as well as the obligation of all who are citizens. I know we talk about the importance of voting in our republic, but so often, again going back to Professor Monson, remember how he talked about how voter turnout is always exaggerated because people know they should vote but they don't? And we actually have a relatively miserable record in this country compared to some other countries in terms of voter turnout. But participating in government at a minimum should include becoming informed and voting. It really should be more than that. We participate in legal institutions. We do jury duty, unless we can find an excuse not to, right? No, we should do jury duty. We should do the other things that are part of being a good citizen. Government of the people works when people participate. When people don't participate, what happens? Representative government can be commandeered. Representative government, in my opinion, is the best way to ensure liberty, but representative government itself can be commandeered if the people don't participate. It can be commandeered by those who do participate. and learn how to game the system. We need to participate in government. We need to follow the Ammon principle. Do you remember the story of Ammon in the Book of Mormon, that great missionary who served the king? He went to the enemy people and said to the king, I want to help you. The king was quite happy to have him there because he was the son of the opposing king, and said, well, sure, I'm going to give you one of my daughters. Now, I don't know how his daughter looked, but he said no. But what he did say is, I want to help with your flocks. I want to help with your flocks and in your stables. He served, and by serving, what happened? Well, you know the rest of the story, but among other things, that principle is that when we serve and help others, their trust in us grows, and our ability to work with them and help them and truly make a difference grows. And I think we don't do this strategically in order to gain something. We do it out of true charity, true love, because we want to help them. And so we must serve, and as we serve and follow the Ammon principle, we will engage in our community. Now, how does that work in practice? You can be a volunteer. You can be the secretary of some organization. Our director of our center, Cole Durham, was for years the secretary of an important international organization. And being the secretary means you don't get any of the glory and you do all of the work. But guess what? You also get to know everybody, and they trust you and they like you. That's a good example of the Ammon principle in application. Number 4, be an example of what is highest and best in your belief. I think it goes without saying the strongest teaching is the teaching of example. Be thou an example of the believers in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, in purity. And let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. If they know you, and they know that you're good, and that you're fair, and that you're decent, and that you want to improve things and help others and be fair to all, they'll trust you, they'll listen to you, they'll want to work with you. Be an example of what is highest and best in your belief. Number 5, stand up, but with civility. We've heard a number of things about civility. We've also heard the importance of standing up. Dino's great example of they're messing with his church. He's not going to let that happen. He knew that he had to stand up. Stand up with civility. Stand firmly on principle. Do not retreat. Do not be negligent. Freedom erodes when people are negligent about it, when they take it for granted. I think that's one of the issues with religious freedom. The erosion has been more precipitous in recent years because it's something that we've come to take for granted. It's something that has been in our country universally respected. And though respected, it's been taken for granted. And so now other voices are ascendant that say that religious freedom really has a very narrow meaning, that should be confined to the home or the house of worship, and that in its broader sense, it's merely cloaking or disguise for something much more insidious. So we need to stand up firmly on principle and not be negligent. Freedom has always required sacrifice, as our own Mormon pioneer ancestors and others have demonstrated. Effective advocacy, however, requires civility. They won't listen to you otherwise. If you're shrill or pushy, you will only prove their suspicion that you are unreasonable or even bigoted. We have to stand on civility. I think we can follow the Savior's example in that regard. Very principled, immovable in his position, and yet always treated others with dignity and maintained that dignity in his own being. Is there a possible agenda for future action? And here, this slide just simply represents some of my own thoughts coalescing of some of the suggestions made during presentations of others. And what I'm talking about here is maybe concrete next steps for those who wish to defend religious liberty in terms of a political or legal agenda. Seek targeted, workable legislative protections for religion on the local, state, and federal level. I think we've seen and heard explanations of why targeted, workable legislation is more reasonable, easier to get, and perhaps more helpful than other broader, more theoretical and constitutional-like protections that would require litigation, although that's another avenue we can't abandon. But targeted legislation that contains carve-outs that protects religious freedom, as in the Utah Compromise, there's a whole series of protections. That's a great idea. That's a good way forward. Do not acquiesce to a narrow view of religious freedom. I mentioned something before about that narrow view, which is growing in its popularity and the following it has among others. Continue to assert the legitimacy of viewpoints informed by faith in civil and political dialogue. Faith must continue to assert itself in the public square, or it may become the expected norm that it retire from the public square. And thus, in civil ways, we must continue to insist on its legitimacy. Select targeted, winnable lawsuits, and don't be afraid to go to the Supreme Court. That's another avenue we can't forget. There may be others. This is not necessarily a clear agenda, but some suggestions for topics. Finally, a caution. Some things do not help and can even hurt. For instance, if we're shrill, if we're not civil, I mentioned to you how that just reaffirms people's understanding that, yes, we are unreasonable or we are bigoted. Distinguish carefully between what is vital and what is less critical. We have to choose our battles to go after that which is most important. Follow the prophet. Don't presume to speak for the church or to insist on your own view of how the church should respond to an issue. I think we're taught that we should act upon correct principles and do many things of our own free will and choice, but we've got to do it independently of our institution. That is, we can't presume to speak for the church, nor should we imply that we speak for the church or that we know how church leaders would react to a particular issue. Here's a quote from Elder Christofferson again. The church is keenly aware of political and social realities. In the public realm, the church must make difficult, pragmatic decisions about how and when it expresses its views on marriage and which public policies it advocates or opposes, even as it upholds and defends the purity of its doctrine. There's reason for hope. You see here, if you can see it, Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith in front of the Carthage jail, which in the summer of 1844, they were in the custody of the state of Illinois, and the governor had guaranteed them safety, but there was a mob that came and shot them, and they were killed, thinking that then the church would be finished. This was a dark part of the history of religious freedom for this nation, and certainly for this for our church. A very dark chapter in religious freedom, but it was a chapter that was still hopeful. And what we've seen grow from that seed of sacrifice and martyrdom has gone on to create a great church, one that is filling the earth. And the message of Jesus Christ, as revealed to the prophet Joseph Smith, is not finished because Joseph Smith is gone. in our dark hours, I hope we never go back to that kind of violence and that kind of persecution that our ancestors suffered as they were driven and as they were robbed, as they were stripped of their property, as they were abused, and in many cases were killed. I hope that never returns to the Latter-day Saints or any other group of religious believers in this country. I hope that's truly in our past. But if we can arise from that dark chapter to a greater light, then we must hope also in our own present and in our own future. The prophet Joseph Smith, when he was in Liberty Jail, at a time when he had been starved and deprived of liberty, was in a room that he couldn't stand up in the room for more than 6 months on end, and was treated in the most awful manner. He wrote an epistle, a letter back to the Latter-day Saints, and reminded them of their duty. In section 123 of the Doctrine and Covenants, his letter is preserved, and it says, among other things, that they should be putting together an inventory of the wrongs done to them, that they should be pursuing legal remedies. That's good advice for us today as well, that they should be conscious of what their rights are and seeking to defend their rights. We know that they were never really given the relief they deserved at that period of time. But this epistle, in this very, very dark hour for Joseph Smith, for the prophet Joseph Smith, and for the church generally, it contains in its closing verse a message of hope, I think, that is important for all of us as we end today. Truth will prevail. Therefore, dearly beloved brethren, let us cheerfully do all things that lie in our power, and then may we stand still with the utmost assurance to see the salvation of God and for his arm to be revealed. Thank you.